Go.
Okay. All right, this is the Shadow a Leader presentation on John Anthony DiLorenzo. He lived from 1927 to 2009. He was the owner of the music store in Boca Raton, Florida. When people think about great teams, they often think about famous teams. But you don't have to be famous to have a great team. Johnny D and the folks at the music store had a great team, and I was proud to be a part of it. The following is my recollection of Johnny D as a leader of the team at the music store. I met Johnny in the year 2000. When I first walked into his music store, I was immediately struck by the family atmosphere. He was a guy who maintained a real sense of teamwork and family in his business. Even though his father was in his 90s, he still sometimes came to the music store to work. His father's name was Anthony, his middle name. His friends called him Tony. Everyone else just called him Pops. In order to get a job at the music store, you had to have Pop's stamp of approval. And the way that Pops figured out whether or not he liked you was that he would make fun of you. If you couldn't get past a light ribbing from Pops, you weren't cut out to work there. One of the great things about a great leader is recognizing their limitations. Johnny was a great leader, and he recognized that he was not someone who could maintain discipline over a bunch of rowdy teenagers, working as roadies for him. So for control, he employed his manager, Frank, who was tough as nails. Frank never had much to do, though, because Johnny could wither a person just with one glance. It wasn't that he was particularly threatening, you just hated to disappoint him. All right. So, I'm going to cover, I just did my first recollections of meeting Johnny. Now I'm going to do his leadership style. I'm going to talk about a day with Johnny D. My recollection of sort of what our typical time going out to set up for a music concert would be. How he would manage conflicts within the group. And how he built trust a lot of times through managing those conflicts. And then I'll give my conclusions. As I said before, his leadership style was very much in the framework of teamwork. In The Secret of Great Groups by Warren Bennis, he says that the heart of every great group is a shared dream. And I suppose that the shared dream of the music store was that everyone there wanted to be as professional as possible in the music industry. They sold and rented everything that you would need to put on a show. Absolutely everything, from guitars and keyboards and drums to lighting and sound equipment and even the stages. And it was always our goal to pull off a show without any mistakes. We also wanted to meet and hang out with as many celebrities as we possibly could. Okay, so I guess the best way for me to explain how Johnny D would lead his team what his teamwork leadership was is to tell you about a day that we had with him. We did this jazz festival one time, and it was a big deal. It was full of headliners from the 1960s. And we had the Supremes, and we had the Drifters with the last original Drifter. Didn't have Diana Ross, but we got the Supremes. Anyway, so the day began at around 5 a.m. We all gathered together at the shop's warehouse, and Johnny D had been up the night before preparing a list of all the equipment we would need. And that was one of his, this does not belong here. Okay. That was one of his things, is that he always wanted to be prepared. And so he had stayed up the night before. He had gathered everything that he could reach together in the center of the warehouse, and anything that he couldn't reach, he knew exactly where it was, and he had his checklist ready to go. So when we all got there at 5 a.m., he knew exactly what he needed us to do, and he split us off into teams of 2, and everyone was given a list of things to go and collect and bring to the truck. Frank stood by sipping coffee and glaring at anyone who dared to slow down, and Johnny had his checklist, standing by the truck, watching everything come in. And as each person came in, he would say, "Thank you," and check his thing off the list. I don't know if it was the excitement or Frank's glaring, or maybe it was the fact that Johnny promised us donuts if we finished by 6 a.m. But we worked quickly. We got our donuts, and by 7 a.m. we were on location setting up for the big concert, the gig. Frank's nerves were frayed. He was not used to getting up this early. And so at one point, him and one of the other roadies got into an argument about how some piece of equipment should be set up. And Frank was just being a belligerent ass. And the roadie was ready to quit. And so Johnny, he maintained his cool, and he stepped in, separated everybody. He pulled the roadies aside, and, he said, "Look, guys, I know we're all tired and sore, but if we can pull it together, tonight we're going to get to meet the Supremes, and we're going to get to meet the Drifters. and if we do this right, we're going to get bigger gigs in the future." And he was absolutely right about that. Got to meet Blood, Sweat, and Tears, got to do release parties for rap labels and all sorts of big things. Got to meet some very big studio musicians. Anyway, he also pulled Frank aside, but no one else got to hear that conversation. After that, everything went smooth. We finished up about 4:30. Everyone worked the whole time without a break, though we each probably smoked an entire pack of cigarettes. When Johnny pulled us aside to remind us of our goal, he was doing this thing that Warren Bennis talks about in that article, Secret of Great Groups, called Managing Conflict by Abandoning Individual Ego. He was reminding us of what it was we were trying to accomplish together. And by pulling Frank aside, separating us from them, he was doing this other thing that Bennis talks about, calling protecting them from the suits. And Frank was definitely our suit. For him, everything was about time and budget. He was a strict authoritarian whose favorite saying was, "You'll do it my way or you won't have a job." Johnny protected us from him by keeping his temper in check, but he also didn't embarrass Frank, which I always thought was very classy of him. By pulling both parties aside separately, he cooled the temperature and prevented all of us from feeling embarrassed or singled out. He kept Frank's trust by not undermining his authority. He built loyalty with us by reminding us of our shared goal and instead of berating us for our shortcomings. After setup, we all went back to the shop. We took turns napping. At 6, we left for the concert. The show was between 8 and 10. It went perfectly, although everyone was disappointed that Diana Ross wasn't there. And everyone was really happy with the job that we did. We got to meet the last remaining original Drifter. And here's the thing. Even though we only had a small team, I think it was 6 guys plus Frank and Johnny. Johnny gave us hope that we could pull off the job by encouraging us throughout the process, by always being on top of what the next step was. And if it hadn't been for his leadership and direction, we never could have done what we did. After the show, half the crew didn't show up for work the next day. And instead of taking it out on those who did, Johnny ordered lunch for the people who did show up. In great teams, there must be shared goals, an abandonment of individual egos, protection from the suits, viewing themselves as underdogs, which we certainly did, and strong leadership. We were a great team, and Johnny was a great leader, and Frank was the perfect suit. And according to Warren Bennis, great teams are also usually young, and not one of the roadies was over 20. I was only 16 at the time, and I only worked there for a little over a year, but it was one of the best times of my life. I learned a lot from my time working at the music store, mostly from just paying attention. It taught me about the value of hard work, taught me about loyalty, professionalism, and always treating people as if they have value, even when you disagree. And that's the end of my presentation.